Welcome to Redefine the Circle, a podcast where we discuss all things pitching. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. In this podcast, we're going to highlight topics that focus on how to maximize your pitchers now. We're going to discuss some of the trends that we've seen at S2 Breakthrough and talk about how we use data to create systems and training approaches that are specific to each pitcher. It's so important for us to continue to share this information and facilitate discussion within the pitching community so we can keep evolving as coaches and ultimately grow pitching into something it's never been before. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining the quest to redefine the circle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development here at S2 Breakthrough. In today's discussion, I really want to talk about this concept of location versus break, or command versus hitting spots. And the reason why I was inspired to make today's episode is really because recently, as we've had more of our S2 pitchers in season now, particularly at the high school level, a lot of the feedback that they give when we're asking them, how are things going? What are certain pitches that are working? There's been a few circumstances that have come up where pitchers have given me feedback regarding, well, I wasn't hitting my spots. And so it's given me an opportunity to pause, to ask them, what do you mean by that? To maybe educate them a little bit more about how I think about those concepts. And so I thought it would really be a great discussion for Redefine the Circle. So a few weeks ago, we posted the S2 Breakthrough a high-speed video really talking about this concept that the idea of creating spin in a certain direction and therefore being able to create break on a pitch is not always the same as a pitch's location. So in that particular post, in that high-speed video, we showed three different videos or three different pitches. The first was a pitch that went up in the zone. So the pitcher was trying to throw a rise ball. She threw it up in the zone without data. She may have said, that was a great pitch. It clearly kind of went up on this angle. It ended at a great spot, really just above the top of the zone. But what we saw was based on her hand position, specifically where her thumb was on the ball right at delivery, that it actually put a lot of gyro spin on the ball and it was bullet. So it was a non-breaking pitch. Now, it doesn't mean to say that a bullet rise ball can't be an effective pitch. I'm not talking about that concept in today's episode. I'm specifically talking about when we make the assumption that where a pitch ends, its location really equals whether or not it was a good breaking pitch. So that was the first circumstance that I showed, or the first example. And then the second example, the video showed the same pitcher in the same session. Then really as we were getting feedback in each pitch, with using ball flight data, of course, she was really trying to manipulate her hand position, and then she got off the ball too early, essentially. She unloaded or really worked down the whip action too soon, and so the ball height stayed down. However, based on where her finger position was, how she was trying to get her thumb off the ball and create more rotation and to get the fingers inside the ball, she had great hand position and therefore had some backspin on the pitch. So she was successful in manipulating hand position, but because of the timing in which she unraveled the arm, the height of the pitch was not where we intended it to be. Again, doesn't mean that throwing a pitch down in the zone with backspin can't be effective, but we were really trying to work on more of this neutral height through the middle to upper part of the zone for a backspin pitch to take off. So that was the second example. And then in the third example, I showed how she was able to bring those two concepts together, where she was understanding, okay, what's the timing that I need to unravel the arm in order to start the pitch at the right height for what I'm going for in this circumstance, while also feeling my hand position in a way that allows me to create the correct spin and to get backspin on the pitch to create break up in the zone. So the reason why we posted that is to show that we can't make the assumption that because a pitch lands at a particular location that it had break. So curve might be another example. Just because someone angles a pitch in the outside part of the zone, maybe they're throwing obviously away to a righty, then we can't assume like great curveball. If we know for that pitcher what a great curveball looks like for her is maybe a pitch with horizontal movement, maybe it's a pitch that has really good backspin. It's not just about the location. It doesn't go hand in hand. So the reason why, I think we can kind of take a step back and think, why do we make the assumption that location equals break? Well, obviously, we haven't had ball flight data for the majority of our time in the game. And so traditionally or historically, the way pitchers have been successful is to throw really hard and hit spots. And so we still use language like that today. She needs to hit her spots. She needs to hit her spots. And so, as hitters have gotten much better in our game, we know that as tech and data has entered into the space, really it started with baseball. Softball kind of got the trickle-down effect that translated directly into things like hitting and overhand throwing. Then hitters became a lot better. And essentially what we have seen in pitching is that it is not good enough to simply throw hard and hit spots, not at the highest levels of the game. And so data has showed us what it actually takes to be successful. And there's a variety of ways to accomplish it. That would be another episode, a different topic. But there's a variety of ways to be effective and to be successful. But what we know is that break is important. So if we see a pitcher who is maybe in this mid-high school level, trying to play at a higher level in college, and her pitch profile, her break profile, there's nothing unique or special about it. Everything really is mostly a non-breaking pitch, doesn't really have any unique qualities to it or anything that stands out from the average population. Even if that pitcher hits her spots, she's really capped on the level that she can throw at. Now, obviously, I know velo is a variable, so maybe if that pitcher's throwing in the 70s, then maybe we're having a different conversation here. But most of our pitchers obviously are sitting in somewhat normal velo range, and no break at all it's not enough. And we now know that because of data. So because of that, we now need to make sure that we are preparing our pitchers, educating our pitchers, training our pitchers in a way that allows them to see what they are and are not doing, when it is appropriate to start pushing for higher level concepts, and to make sure that we're not essentially leading them down this path where they don't have anything unique in their ball path. We're telling them that they do because they hit locations, and then it comes time for them to want to play at a higher level and they don't have the stuff to do it. So that's really what I have thought about a lot recently when pitchers have given the feedback of, well, I haven't been hitting my spots. And so, I think, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the concept, the difference really between what we know about your pitch profile. What are your strengths? What's your main breaking pitch? And how do your other pitches work off of that? Where are we struggling with command? We don't want to say such a blanket, generic phrase like, I wasn't hitting my spots. That, in my mind, is like a phrase from the past, and it doesn't nearly touch all of the complexities that it really takes for pitchers to be effective, to be successful. So with that said, I want to really talk about where I think we can often go wrong or lead pitchers astray starting in their early ages. So what we do as a pitching community typically is that we take a young pitcher and we say, now you're going to learn a curve, you're going to have a drop, you're going to have a screw and a rise, and we have all these different pitch types. And so we see those pitchers, they come in here for assessments, and our pitchers are typically 13 at the youngest age when they come in, but they come in and they have all of these pitch labels, and none of them differentiate from one another. So it's the same spin profile, and what they're doing is they're just angling that pitch. So what they call a curve is just an angled pitch in that direction. What they call a rise is just an angled pitch in that direction. But the balls are actually spinning in the same way. So those pitches will pull away from each other very early. That is much different than if we said, okay, we have these pitch labels, and those pitches actually they spin differently, they have different pitch shapes, they have different movement profiles. And when that's the case, then this allows us to throw pitches straighter through the zone, and then for their spin and their break to obviously take them off of that trajectory. That's a much higher level concept. And so, let's kind of come back to this idea of these young pitchers. What we have seen, the data is clear as day to us at this point at S2 Breakthrough, is that in order to create variability in the arm. So we're talking about small details like manipulating hand position. To have that level of a feel and awareness to manipulate the hand in order to create different spin profiles, in order to create different break profiles on pitches, there needs to be a lot of stability in the body. So from our from what we've seen from our data, young pitchers, so certainly any pitcher who has not yet hit puberty, but even about typically at least a year after that point, pitchers are just much too unstable, so they're they don't have nearly enough stability to produce enough feel and awareness over what's going on at the hand position. So these are the pitchers that we are looking at that just all of their pitches have the exact same spin profile. And so even though when they go to a pitching lesson, maybe their pitching coach is like, now I'm gonna teach you this pitch, I'm gonna teach you this pitch, and they see a pitch angling in that direction, there's not a sense of, I don't wanna say truth, but there's not really a sense of truth to what they're growing. And so at S2, the approach that we take is first we track a pitcher's level of stability. Again, because of the way the body is changing from a standpoint of height, from when the pelvis expands at puberty, when they're putting on mass. This is a time frame where instability is high for pitchers. So we're watching that stability grow. It is not subjective. We have an assessment that is tracking what their level of stability is. And once they reach a particular threshold within our assessment of trunk stability, then we start introducing concepts of really having more variability in the arm. And we don't jump right to manipulating hand position. That is really granular. And instead, this is really where plyos and throwing different weights of plyos comes into play. We focus on introducing that concept to pitchers where they start throwing different weights through plyos to understand the difference of upper arm and lower arm, how to segment, how to unravel the arm, instead of feeling as if the motion is highly unstable, the trunk is unstable. What we typically see then is that the levers will stiffen, the levers take on the tension that's not being achieved in the middle of the body, and then there's no separation or segmentation between upper and lower arm. So weighted plyos, overload, I talked about this in the last episode, the reason why plyos are there's a variety of reasons why they're a staple training modality here at S2, but that's one of them. That's sort of, okay, we have a baseline level of trunk stability. Now we're gonna introduce a level of variability in the arm action. Then we're watching, and then as our pitchers cross over and then achieve the next threshold of stability, then we start saying, okay, they should have a good enough feel of how to unravel their arm action, have segmentation between upper and lower arm. Now let's go to some weighted softballs and let's manipulate hand position. So when they are throwing plyos, trying to just generally segment the arm, we're just talking about throwing fastballs into the plyo wall. Now all of a sudden they're warming up. Let's talk about unraveling drop ball or rise ball, because we're attacking a certain spin direction, a certain pitch shape or pitch profile. That will be unique to them. What we see, what their neutral is, what their arm slot is, an episode for another time. But what we decide they're chasing as far as that first category of variability in the way the ball breaks, they're gonna start to warm it up at low intensity and use weighted softballs to give them good feel over where their hand position is. Oftentimes, we will actually use Rapsodo for this. So they're throwing at low intensity. We just take the target and we move it up right behind Rapsodo, and they throw at low intensity. So the trunk is really stable, and we start to see. So in our experience, when a pitcher is able to achieve a particular spin direction, or they're able to achieve certain break numbers at low intensity, even if they're not getting at high intensity, essentially it's on its way. It's like the way for us to measure it in a regressed state. If they're not getting it at low intensity, then that's really where we certainly aren't gonna expect to see it at high intensity. So our training becomes really focused on doing things to start to get it to appear at low intensities. So now we're talking about manipulating hand position, and then this is where we're starting to grow somebody's break profile, their pitch profile. We're starting to explore variability. So it is really important that we don't race to teach our athletes, like, okay, we need to have all of these different pitches. What is happening at the 8U, 10U, 12U, maybe even the majority of the 14U level, are that pitchers are throwing a single pitch. It is spinning in a single way, and they are angling it to be curve, rise, drop, screw, whatever names we might have for our pitches. And so we are saying, you need all this variability, you need all these names. And so we're gonna say that those pitches are successful. It's curving, it's rising, it's dropping, because it's ending in that location. And so if that's all that a pitcher has to go off of, and there is no data to check whether or not that pitch is actually breaking, that pitch is actually pulling off of its initial trajectory because of the way it's spinning, then that pitcher goes through her career thinking that she has all of this variability. But then she gets to this point where she then wants to play at a higher level, and she doesn't have pitches that scale. She doesn't have pitches that would indicate effectiveness or success at a higher level in college. And that, to me, can be a really sad story for a pitcher, because here she is being led astray this whole time as if she has all of these pitches, she has all this variability, and in reality she doesn't. This is where the data is key. We cannot simply use our eye, take a look at where a pitch is ending, and say that that is directly correlated with where it started and how it's spinning or how it's breaking off of that path. They are not always the same concept. And again, I think the example that we gave in that high-speed post is really a good way for us to start to grasp this. So the way we look at it at S2, that's, as I kind of already walked through, the way we attack it in training is to really test their levels of stability, and then to start using ball flight data and different training modalities, overload and underload, to really get them to produce that variability. But from a sort of larger standpoint, what we're really looking at progressing for pitchers is stability. Number one is the baseline for what they need. Most of the pitchers that we see that come in for an assessment, they don't have stability outside the motion, let alone in such a complex movement like the pitching motion. So we're working on developing stability outside the motion in order to then be able to have higher levels of stability within the motion. From there, then we should start to see really good command, just good neutral ball path. So if we're seeing pitchers who are throwing, they're young, maybe they are early teenagers, and their neutral ball path and throwing a fastball is really not under their command. It slices in, it slices away, they're often pulling it up in the zone. Basically, this is an indicator that their trunk stability and awareness of where their body and arm are in space is just too low. And so that's really where we want to start. Just general ball path being nice and neutral, and then ultimately then command over that ball path. Okay, so can you take this neutral middle fastball and now unravel the upper arm and the lower arm in slightly different timing to get that ball to move up a little bit more, to get it to go outside versus inside. This is not spin direction. This is not break. This is just having a level of manipulation over the timing at which the arm unravels. This goes back to that concept of how we introduce plyos and different weights to be able to manipulate one ball path to adjust height and to adjust inside versus outside. It's sort of horizontal starting point. Okay, so once pitchers can do that, this is typically an indication then that now we're moving in this direction where we can start to work on this pitch development phase. So pitch development is what I referred to, is where now we're using these weighted softballs, we are manipulating hand position, we're watching through ball flight data, we're getting feedback, objective feedback on how that ball is moving. Is it a spin direction concept? Is it a gyro concept? These are all the types of things that we are watching for as we are trying to create pitches that have variability in how they spin and how they break. So first is, okay, as I said, enough stability to create a neutral ball path that then we can manipulate. This is all just why we need to keep our pitchers in a space of just throwing fastballs for as long as possible, because then once you do it right, once you follow that progression appropriately, the variability can come fast at the end. You want to hold off until you're at the appropriate point to then take on the goal of creating more variability on the ball. So okay, we get to this point, and now what we're really looking for is we're in this space of pitch development. We are saying to our pitchers, we want to create pitches that are unique, that separate you from the other pitchers in your class of your typical age range, right? So now we're typically talking about pitchers who are 16, 17 in this recruiting sort of realm, where we want to make sure that they have pitches that stand out, that they know that they have those pitches, that they make sure they go into their travel ball world or their high school world, really communicating to their coaches what those strength pitches are, how to then utilize their other pitches to complement or support their strength pitch. This is the world that we often live in with our pitchers, the player development world, at S2. And so once we really are in this pitch development, creating pitches that are unique to them, that make them stand out, now in our eyes comes command over those pitches. So, okay, we did a really great job of creating a drop ball. It drops 7-8 inches. This is significant. This gives you a pitch that separates you from the average pitcher of your age. Okay, now can we command it? So it might break like that, but you are constantly elevating it in the zone and it's getting hammered. So can you take a unique characteristic about a pitch and then be able to command it? But typically our pitchers don't struggle with that as much. This is something that's a little bit easier for them to learn to do because we've progressed through that natural sort of like progression, if you will, of first general command, the idea of unraveling the upper arm and the lower arm at different timings to manipulate height, to manipulate inside versus outside. And so when we get to the point of we've developed something unique on a pitch, we have good breaking pitches or a pitch, depends on the pitcher. When we apply the concept of command to it, now we're asking them, can you keep generating that hand position to create that spin profile on that pitch while manipulating the timing of how you unravel it? So it is complex. This is a high-level concept, and this is why we have to make sure that we understand how to appropriately arm our pitchers with the tools that allow them to be successful at the next level. So some things that can frustrate me sometimes in the world of S2 player development is sometimes the college level coaches will say things like, I went to see that pitcher and she didn't have great command. And so I might say, you're right, but we also know that she has really unique characteristics in her pitches, in her pitch profile, maybe 1 or 2. And so because of that, in my mind, command is next for her. And she still has 2 years before she would even get to be a freshman. And so whenever I hear feedback like that, in my mind, it's very similar to when an athlete might come back and say, I didn't hit my spots, as if command is the main predictor. And instead, should you be able to command your neutral pitch, your neutral fastball? Yes, because that's the sort of foundational, piece to being able to do these higher level concepts. But if you have this great sink pitch, this great drop ball, or you have this backspin rise ball or curve ball that are really unique and you just don't quite have the command over it yet, I say to our pitchers, it's okay. You're only 16 or 17 years old. Like, you have a couple of years to work through that before you even get to college. So be careful not to just go into hitting spots, because we might see oftentimes that when pitchers revert to simply hitting spots, they actually regress as far as how they're spinning the ball or what break they're producing. Like, they are oftentimes more willing, because of the culture we've created in pitching, to pull back on the uniqueness of their pitches just to hit a spot. And we don't want that, right? Because it makes them more average. And so this is the progression that we want them to really understand. So let me back up to when I said I get feedback sometimes when pitchers are saying, I didn't hit my spots. I'm like, okay, let's be a lot more detailed in what that means. Okay, were you getting any, what do we know about your profile? Let's start with that. What's your main pitch? What's your best breaking pitch? Was that pitch often its command? Why? Was it always in the dirt? Were you elevating it? Let's talk about that versus hitting spots, because the way that we talk about is that our pitchers absolutely likely have non-breaking pitches in their profile. Sometimes those pitches are very important as far as the role they're playing and how they're supporting their other pitches. For your non-breaking pitches, those are all about spots and location. We know that, right? And so that's important. But for your breaking pitches, the ones that you're really attacking hitters with, we know we're not trying to necessarily control their end point. We are trying to control their starting point, and then we're going to trust that the break is going to work off of that. We want to throw through the zone with our breaking pitches, and our non-breaking pitches are the ones that we want to angle and stick the location, hit the spot. So differentiating between these concepts is an absolute must for our pitchers to understand, but as a whole, like anything else in the player development world, part of the education and so much of the education for us is with our athletes being able to communicate these concepts, but it's also incredibly important for the pitching culture as a whole to also understand these concepts, for coaches to start evolving in what they're asking of their athletes, to understand what they're looking for when they're trying to identify athletes that might be successful at their level. We have to get on the same page with language and education of what it really looks like for a pitcher to gradually work through these fundamental concepts in order to ultimately be able to produce concepts and pitch profiles that scale at a high level. So I do think it's a concept that we are not quite clear on yet as a pitching community. So I wanted to come on and really hammer out some details of the types of things that we see and how we really see it through a player development and through the S2Is generally. So hopefully that discussion stirs some things in your brain, as I always hope that Redefine the Circle episodes do. Happy to hear some of your questions, thoughts, and comments as you listen to this episode. As always, feel free to reach out to me directly. Looking forward to our next episode here on Redefine the Circle. And between now and then, remember, continue to quest on to redefine the circle. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'd love to connect and hear your feedback. You can contact me directly at ashley@s2breakthrough.com. If you're listening, you can leave us a review, or if you're watching, go ahead and leave a comment below. Also, be sure to follow S2 Breakthrough on all of our social media channels and subscribe to Stream S2 to find all things player development. Until next time, quest on.